Going back to when you're in and dealing with more uncomfortable times when you're in the military, I do want to touch on when you're in Afghanistan and what your first deployment was like. I know that you want to very much focus on, as the book does, in terms of the regiment rather than your own personal journey. What was the regiment doing when you were in Afghanistan? I mean, obviously you're fighting the Taliban, but can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yes, sure. So the Australian Special Operations mission was basically to support the Australian on the coalition's main effort. So inside Uruzgan province, it was the Australian reconstruction. So basically providing infrastructure to move towards a more stable economy, a more stable environment to try and push a more of a democratic process. So looking back now, trying to overlay a Western democracy over, century-old tribal conflict and tribal warlords just did not work, as history has proven very recently. We basically ran away and it was a catastrophic failure. But anyway, I digress. Yeah. So our job as a Special Operations Task Force was really broad. It sort of ebbed and flowed from, disruption operations to targeting Taliban leadership and so forth. But basically our job, as a group was to drive around, fly around, and get in a gunfight to disrupt or to minimize the ability of the enemy to take away from the main effort of reconstruction. So to simplify it more, the civilian and reconstruction agencies would be in an area and carrying out, say, for example, building a hospital. The infantry guys would be in patrol bases later on during the war, or just local security, so providing that organic security to the reconstruction effort. And then the special operations guys, our job was to move around the entire of Uruzgan and later on into Helmand province and actually target key Taliban nodes, like command and control nodes, communication nodes, targeting actual Taliban commanders. So one of our roles in 2008 was direct action. So we had what's called a JPEL list, which is basically a list of people that were to be eliminated or captured. So we'd get given a target pack and a person, and we'd walk, drive, fly into a village and either capture or kill him. So that was one of our roles. And the other roles was basically, as I said, disruption, which was let's get in a convoy of, 50, 60 vehicles and just drive around Uruzgan province and see what's up. Now, that's a very simplified process, but that essentially what it comes down to, what our role was.
So in terms of when you're not doing the direct action going in and targeting these people, you're essentially using your bait to try and draw the Taliban away from the main.
Exactly right. Yep.
How did you feel about basically being used as bait? How was the regiment? Did you guys care, or was it like we're literally bait?
Look, it's only been very recently that I've actually looked back on the whole space and the mission and trying to understand why we're there. But honestly, I couldn't have cared less where we were. I would have gone now and done the same thing if we're legally allowed to do it. It wouldn't matter to me. I'd never got into politics and never got into why we're there, or is this right or wrong, or I wouldn't have a clue back then about.
No, I wasn't meaning it from a politics point of view, just in terms of a tactics point of view, in terms of.
Oh no, great. I think every single operator, we spent every day waiting for a gunfight. And the worst parts of Afghanistan was when you were out driving around vehicles for 25 days and no one would shoot at you. It just felt like a complete waste of time. You're like, oh, bad luck, maybe next time. So we all wanted to get into a fight. That's why we're there. That's why we became commandos. So, yeah. No,
I think it's
a question. I didn't feel bad at being used as bait at all. No.
So you guys are rocking around on using yourself as bait, getting into gunfights when you can. How long was that first deployment?
They're all just under 5.5 months.
Okay. And was 2010 your second, or was it
Correct.
Another
Second.
one in between that? Okay.
No, second.
And you're a couple of days away from coming home, 21st of June, 2010. Talk to me about what happened that day.
Yeah, so 21st of June 2010, as you said, we were due to come home in less than a week or so. So this is one of our final sort of operations. We just recently been involved in the Battle of Shawalikot. That was both SAS and 2 commandos. So there was a whole lot of intelligence that had fed off the back of that battle. And as a result,
what was that battle? Before we talk about the helicopter crash, talk to me about that battle.
Yes, the Battle of Shawalikot was basically it was an operation initially by 2 commando to clear out a Taliban safe haven in a village called Shanatu in northern Kandahar. And that basically saw 2 commando fly into a very heavily fortified with a strong enemy presence. They basically saw two commando in a running battle for over 48 hours, where all elements of the company were at some stages surrounded. Very intense firefight, very close combat. After the second day of Shinatu, a whole bunch of intelligence was picked up, which caused the SASR to launch to target a certain individual. And in actual fact, the Taliban were having what's called a shura, or a meeting, in a village called Tisak, to try and come up with a plan about how they would attack the two commando positions the next morning. That's the exact village that SASR flew into, and as a result, we're in a pretty intense gunfight where Ben Robert Smith was awarded his Victoria Cross. So that all culminated after about 4 days, and when we came back, we found out that that'll be Australia's first battle honour since Vietnam, so the Battle of East Shawalikot. And the Governor General came to Commando and SAS to award the battle honour on our flag.
So when you say heavily fortified, what's the reality? What does that look like?
So when I say fortified, I'm not talking about forts and castles. In a similar fashion, when people say they attacked a machine gun nest, it's not like a German World War II pillar box. It's just fortified in the sense that the enemy were well organised. They had very good command and communication. They had open areas covered by fire. It was fortified in the sense that had very sound techniques, tactics, and procedures above and beyond what we traditionally saw inside Uruzgan province. So, for example, and I mentioned this in the book, instead of using radios to communicate, they were using flags to communicate. And that's something that we had not seen before in Uruzgan province, because they knew that if they used their radios, that it would be potentially detectable. So they were using, going back to the Stone Age, and they were using flags, which, you can't be intercepted by radio, right, unless you physically see it. So it was a very sophisticated MO that the Taliban were using in that area.
Where were these tactics coming from? Because if they knew that you hadn't seen them, and I have heard that they were quite well trained and they did have good tactics, and they weren't to be underestimated. So where were they learning this stuff from?
Oh, look, this is well above my pay grade, but I also think it's worth you mentioning that the term Taliban is typically used to describe, all threat forces in Afghanistan. But in actual fact, initial stages of the war, we didn't use the term Taliban. We used anti-coalition militia, because what you'd have these warlords that were using ISAF to fight their own proxy war with other tribal.
What's ISAF?
The International Security Assistance Force that's overarching command structure in Afghanistan. But to answer your question, it wasn't as simple as they're the enemy, they're the Taliban, and we're the good guys, right? It was, there was areas inside Uruzgan province, and in fact Afghanistan as a whole, where it was just tribal war, one tribe fighting against the next tribe. Everyone carries guns. So I think it was a failure of us to understand what's called Pashtunwali tribal law, where essentially if you're not invited or welcome on property, well, they use force to get rid of you. And it's been like that for centuries. And I think we sometimes fail to understand that and categorize everyone as Taliban. So to answer your question, I think anti-coalition militia would be a more common descriptor of the threat. But in certain areas, for example, in the Helmand province and certainly inside northern Kandahar, that wasn't the case. These guys were Taliban. I have no idea where they were trained or where it came from. Like I said, 12 above my pay grade, but I think it's pretty commonly known that they were trained in Pakistan. So hence why the eastern of the
I don't know where they were trained, but they were trained in Pakistan.
Well, look, I don't specifically know where they were trained, but it's common knowledge that most of the training occurred in Afghanistan. In Pakistan. So yeah.
Okay.